Hari Om. Let's start with the prayer. Om Samasta Jana Kalyani Niratam Karunamayam Namami Chinmayam Devam Sadgurum Brahma Vidwaram Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanura Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Tvameva Mata Cha Pita Tvameva Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha Tvameva Tvameva Vidya Dravidam Tvameva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Gurudeva Deva. Hari Om. We are doing the 8th chapter of Panchadashi called Kutastha Deepa Prakaranam, and Kutastha is the word that Vidyaranya uses for this pure consciousness that is illumining the local, the mind, body, mind, intellect, and same as Sakshi Chaitanyam also. So Kutastha Chaitanyam or Sakshi Chaitanyam, or that part of the consciousness that I am. When I say I am identifying with that which is same as the total consciousness, but total consciousness which is infinite, but we are referring to that part of this consciousness that is falling as though onto the local equipment. It is like a total sunlight, and that part of sunlight that is falling on the moon and illumining the moon, which is different from that part of the sunlight that is falling in the Mars and that falling on the Venus, etc., even though there is only one sunlight. So for differentiation, to say that there is something that is illumining the local equipment, and that's what we call it a Kutastha Chaitanyam. Kutastha means unchanging, unwill, which doesn't undergo any modification, whereas on top of it, everything we beat to make changes. If the unwill also changes, then you cannot use it. So therefore, unwill stands for Kutastham, which stands for unchanging, and only thing that unchanging in the universe is only that which is infinite, that is Brahman, because Brahman cannot undergo any change, only finite things can undergo a change. Here, this 8th chapter is very technical because it consists of, it discusses how the knowledge takes place. It's an epistemological analysis. Epistemology is the analysis of how knowledge takes place, and this chapter is trying to differentiate what is the Chidabhasa and what is Kutastha Chaitanyam. And you cannot really differentiate the two by any process other than cognitively one has to do it, because I cannot differentiate the sunlight that is falling on the moon and the light that is reflected by the moon. So there are two actually. One is the original sunlight, another is reflected sunlight. What I am seeing is only reflected sunlight. I cannot see the original sunlight. In fact, original light we cannot see anywhere. It's always a reflected light only I can see, because reflected light comes through my retina, forms an image of the reflected medium. So through reflected medium and the reflection, I had to think in terms of there has to be original light, because the reflecting medium doesn't have a light of its own. Since moon doesn't have the luminosity of its own, looking at the luminous moon, I had to see the sunlight that is really getting reflected. So moon is needed for me to see sunlight. Without the presence of the moon there, I am not able to recognize, not that it's not there, it is there, but I cannot recognize the original sunlight. So same thing applies for consciousness and Chidabhasa and the reflecting medium. Moon is required to reflect, and without the sunlight, moon cannot be seen. If there is no sunlight, the moon is dark. So without the sunlight, moon cannot be seen. But without the moon, sunlight cannot be recognized. In the same way, without the mind. Mind is like a moon. Mind, in fact, moon is the presiding deity of the mind. According to Vedanta, the moon is a presiding deity of the mind. So the mind itself is inert and like any other material. It's only subtle material compared to gross material. That's what he's been referring here. And this subtle material has a capacity to reflect the consciousness. Why? Because it's a subtle material. So why moon is reflecting? Because it's a moon. So it has capacity to reflect. So the capacity to reflect the light of consciousness by the mind, and because of that reflection, the mind is also as though appears as the conscious entity, just as by a reflection of the sunlight, moon, which is not a luminous entity, appears as though a luminous entity in the sky. Exactly same way, the mind, which is essentially inert by nature, appears to be a conscious entity. Conscious entity means there is a life there. So essentially the life itself is nothing but reflection of pure consciousness in the local equipment, depending upon whether the capacity of the local equipment to reflect. This always has to be clear. So wherever there is a subtle material, it has a capacity to reflect, and therefore there is the light of consciousness gets illumined by that, and therefore it appears to be a conscious entity. That means it appears to be alive. And where there is no subtle material, the pure consciousness being infinite, also expressing in terms of the inert material, now only the existent part is being reflected, and the conscious part and Ananda part are not getting reflected, because it's like a stone or any other inert material. They do not have the capacity to reflect the consciousness and also Ananda. So only Sat part gets reflected by the inert material. Wherever the subtle body is there, wherever the subtle material is there, wherever the mind is there, not only the Sat part but Chit part also gets reflected. So now you have both. It exists, we say mind exists, and now mind is also conscious because of the reflection of pure consciousness. So mind is not conscious, but mind appears to be conscious because of the reflection. So looking at the reflecting or conscious mind and looking at the consciousness aspect of the mind, I had to recognize that the consciousness aspect of the mind is coming from pure consciousness, which is Satchidananda. So this has to be clear. Looking at the mind and looking at the consciousness aspect of the mind, I had to recognize that the consciousness aspect of it as well as the existent aspect of it is coming from the pure consciousness. So what is that not coming from the pure consciousness directly is only the name, mind and the form of the mind, whatever form it has. Because my mind is different from your mind is different from somebody's mind. So each mind is different in what sense? In the contents of the mind or the purity of the mind, and so on and so forth. So if we understand these concepts, then we have to understand basically wherever there is a consciousness, because consciousness is infinite, it's always there. It's Nityam. Nityam is Satyam. Satyam is Brahman. Brahman is infinite. So there is never a time it was not there, because if there is a time, then time itself is within the consciousness only. There cannot be anything away from consciousness. So all that has to be brought about in the Vedanta itself. Now all these things should be clear, otherwise the chapter itself is very confusing, and sometimes the terminology that Vidyaranya uses is to amplify certain aspects, and unless we have clear understanding, that aspect will not be clear also. So, because I was reading some commentary of that, and I can recognize that there is a total confusion in the commentary itself, and that's why we have to be very careful in terms of understanding this. Once you have clear understanding, then so therefore this is the epistemological issue. I already mentioned that Vedanta Paribhasha analyzes the epistemological analysis of the Advaita Vedanta. So it's called Vedanta Paribhasha by Dharmaraja Advarendra. Is actually from Maharashtra, and he has written a very small book, and this book has been translated or commented upon by Madhvananda in English. And if you read the English, it's much more difficult because the terms have to be clear. So it's sometimes easier to read the Sanskrit than the English one because of that. So anyway, the point is, I have written a commentary because I'm forced to learn myself to see what exactly it is, because I'm interested in how knowledge takes place. And the critical analysis of Vedanta Paribhasha is available in my website. If you go to www.advaitaforum.org, under the articles you will see Vedanta Paribhasha, and it will direct to Dennis White's website, which he has edited it so that there is not a lot of English and grammatical mistakes have been corrected, and he has put the name as Critical Analysis of Vedanta Paribhasha. It's not incomplete because I analyzed up to Upamana. I have to complete that. Anyway, that provides you some analysis of this aspect that we are discussing here. So those who want to know more about it, one can look more carefully, and there it's systematically it's been analyzed. So here we are looking at the difference between the Chidabhasa and pure consciousness. What is Chidabhasa? It's like looking at this. I want to differentiate the moonlight from the sunlight. So how do I? Moonlight is coming from the moon, but moonlight is moon doesn't have a light, so it is only sunlight only, but reflected by the moon. So how can I differentiate moonlight from the sunlight? Same as differentiating the Chidabhasa from the Sakshi Chaitanyam or Kutastha Chaitanyam. So here the techniques are being discussed here in some form, and how I can differentiate the looking at the sunlight, looking at the moonlight. I had to see cognitively, understandingly, what is that bit that shines between that. It's like sunlight is illumining the moon. Sunlight is also illumining the, say, the Venus or a Mars. Now there is a Venus and there is a Mars. In between the two there is also sunlight. So looking at in between the two and also looking these two, recognize that there is a sunlight only without reflection, and that's what is called the Sandhi. Sandhi means junction between the two thoughts or junction between the two objects that are getting reflected. So this is what is going to be talked about. So what is the moon and what are these relation here? So Vidyaranya gives a simple analysis. Says I have a wall illumined by the pure sunlight in the sky, and that wall is illuminating as constantly there, and on top of it now I have some mirrors reflecting that sunlight, and the reflected light from the mirrors is also falling on the wall. So on the wall there are two lights. One is direct sunlight smeared out smoothly, so it is a little bit uniformly, and there is a focused sunlight from the, say this is a convex lenses, say, and then it's reflecting the light, convex mirror reflecting the light, and bright spots are there. So wherever there is a bright spot, there are two lights. One is the general light of the sunlight, and also there is a special spotlight on there. So, and in between these spotlights there is only general light. General light we call it as a Sakshi Chaitanyam. So in between the thoughts that arise, these are spots. So actually we don't have spots, we have many spots simultaneously, but for the purpose of analysis, assume that I have a thought, I have a thought, I have a thought, and looking at, I have a bright spot, and bright spot, and in the sandhi, in between the two thoughts, there is no thought there, and there is only pure Chaitanyam. So whenever the thought rises, there is a reflection magnified by Chidabhasa. Chidabhasa means reflected consciousness. Consciousness falling on the thought and engulfing the thought, because consciousness is everywhere, and therefore it falls everywhere of the thought and illumines the thought, because the thought is nothing but a subtle material, because it's a product of mind. So it's a subtle material, therefore has a capacity to reflect. So the reflected light from the thought, we call it a knowledge of the thought, because this is a consciousness that is getting reflected. So I am conscious of the thought, because the consciousness is illumining the thought. It's clear? But consciousness was there before also thought, and also should be there when the thought is there, and when the thought goes away, it is still there. Just like a wall is there, and even a bright spot I put it, well, the wall light is there, and the bright spot is also there. If I remove the bright spot, original wall light is there. In the bright spot also, original light is also there, but bright spot, because I am paying attention to the brightness of the spot, so it is magnified, therefore we call it only Chidabhasa illumined. Brightness of the local consciousness, the consciousness is getting magnified by the thought, we call it a Chidabhasa, reflected consciousness, even though Chidabhasa is there all the time. So one has to be careful. It's not that Chidabhasa arises only when our thought rises, because that will if you just read it, that's what you will get the understanding, and that's what people have interpreted also, some people. So one has to be very careful. Chidabhasa is all the time there. If there is no Chidabhasa, you are a dead person. So Chidabhasa is all the time there, even when there are no thoughts. Means the thoughtless state is also mind, and a mind without thoughts, what is reflecting? What is reflecting is pure Chidabhasa. That's why I am able to see. So, because consciousness cannot be seen by itself and what cannot be recognized unless it's reflected. So, as long as the mind is there, it has the capacity to reflect. So, if there is no mind, then there is no reflection. But if there is no mind, there is no life also. So, it's not that I am go beyond the mind. So, going beyond the mind, you will go beyond the mind only when you are dead. Even when you are dead, beyond the mind is particular body doesn't have the mind. Mind has traveling somewhere into different lokas, looking for a locus for it to express itself. So it needs some gross body to express itself, or some subtle body, some other body where it can express, just like in the dream state where I am, even though it is in my waking body, but I am in the dream state where I create a dream body with the dream senses and all that also, where I am transacting in the world. So for transacting I need a body. For dream transactions I need a dream body. Their dream body is different from a dream mind. So dream mind is also subtler compared to the dream body. So inside the dream I have a dream world, dream gross world also, and dream subtle world also, because I am seeing other people and life also, and life is subtler than the expression of the gross material there. All that is exactly identical to the waking state, but that's why for a dreamer, dream is not a dream as long as he is in the dream. Same way, we have to understand that the Chidabhasa is always there. So when you say go beyond the mind, you cannot go beyond the mind. Mind has to be there. What is going beyond the mind is mind without any thoughts. And that's what you can do by some yoga practice also. So Patanjali Yoga describes the mind without thoughts. Now that state of mind, so one has to use the mind to even to go beyond the mind. So one has to use the mind where I don't have thoughts. That's all it means. When I don't have a thought, what is there is silence, or just reflection of pure mind without the thoughts. And what is being illumined? The Sakshi Chaitanyam alone is illumining, because that is a dominant compared to Chidabhasa, even though Chidabhasa is there. So Chidabhasa is there, but it's not spotted with, because it becomes magnified only when the thoughts come in the picture. So all these things to be clear in understanding Vedanta in terms of who recognizes, what realizes, and all that. So even in Sushupti in the deep sleep state where there are no thoughts, there is a mind in folded form only, but that mind also being illumined by the consciousness, and there is a Chidabhasa, and Chidabhasa mind, everything is there in the deep sleep state. It's not a mindless state. Even in the deep sleep state there is a mind, but the mind is in a folded form, means expression of thoughts are not there. It has no capacity to think there. That's what is deep sleep state is. So deep sleep state also is an experience of some kind, a subtler experience, and called a Karana Sharira, causal state. We'll come back, he is going to talk about it, all that three states. But here we are looking at the sloka 11, and we'll chant that and continue from there. So this background needs to be understood, as we say, what is the thought, magnification of the thought by Chidabhasa. So when we say Chidabhasa is there, that means it is predominantly Chidabhasa appearance there, even though background Chidabhasa in the background Sandhi. Sandhi means between the thoughts also there too. So one has to be clear, because don't think that there is no Chidabhasa between the thoughts, because if you read it, look at it, it appears as though. So one has to be careful here. So we leave 11 mantra verse. Paragardha prameyeshu ya phalattvena sammata samvid saivahameyortho saivehameyortho vedantokti pramanataha Vedantokti pramanataha. Together. Paragardha prameyeshu ya phalatvena sammata samvid saiveha meyortaha vedantokti pramanataha. So here, after covering the 10th sloka where there is a phalam and there is no phalam, yurti vyapti, phala vyapti. So Vidyaranya is taking an example of external objects and perception of the external objects, and showing how the Chidabhasa enters into the picture in the knowledge of the external objects. That's why it's called epistemological analysis. So according to Vedanta, as mentioned, the mind along with the senses goes out and grasps the object, and in the form and forms a vritti. Vritti means a thought. So that's called vritti vyapti. And the vritti and the mind are all subtle materials, so by itself is inert. And that vritti, whenever it raises in the mind, whenever an object is perceived, then the vritti content, if it is a part, then it's a part vritti. If it's a chair, it's a chair vritti. That means chair thought. That means the contents of that thought is nothing but attributive contents of the chair, or attributive contents of the pot, attributive contents of this object, that object, and so on. So whenever I perceive an object, I say there is a pot, there is a chair, there is a sofa. I am saying that because I am seeing it. I am seeing it. What I am seeing is the form of the pot, and forms a thought in my mind, and that's what I am seeing. And that's being illumined by consciousness. Therefore I say I am seeing means I am conscious of this is a pot, I am conscious of this is a chair, I am conscious of this is a sofa. So I am conscious of the whole world, because every time I perceive something, object, a thought arises, and the thought arises immediately, spontaneously. It is illumined by the consciousness, and that's called reflected, and that's called Chidabhasa. And therefore Chidabhasa the vritti forms, and vritti by itself is inert, and therefore inertness of the vritti is illumined by consciousness to make it alive, as though that means knowledge of the vritti occurs. So jnatatvam, so whenever the pot thought arises or object thought arises and say this is a pot, this is a chair, so these are the statements that I make because I am conscious of pot, I am conscious of this. So simultaneously and spontaneously the knowledge of the pot also occurs in the sense that I am a knower of this thought, I am a knower of that thought. So you can call it ahankara, or you can call it ego, or this is not another thought, but spontaneously what he calls jnatatvam. Here the Vidyaranya uses jnatatvam, means knowingness. Knowingness spontaneously arises, that means it is an ownership of the thought. It's not another vritti. That's why we said if it is another vritti, then we have a problem. How does that vritti will know? Then I have another vritti. So it becomes ad infinitum or anavastu dosa. Therefore, it is not a vritti, it's spontaneously coming. So where does it come? It is coming without the vritti. That means without special reflection by the Chidabhasa. Therefore, it is Sakshi Chaitanyam. So, knowledge, jnatatvam, the knowledge of the pot, say this is a pot and I know this is a pot. That ownership aspect, jnatatvam, is knowingness or owning the knowledge of this is a pot, arises spontaneously in the mind, in the background, and that he calls it is illumined by Sakshi Chaitanyam or Kutastha Chaitanyam. So you have two. One is the pot is being illumined by the Chidabhasa, and the knowledge of the pot is being illumined by the background Sakshi Chaitanyam. Even in the vritti, there are two again, because the background, the Sakshi is always there. But on top of it, there's a bright spot there, just as a bright spot on the wall. Even the wall behind is also there is an illumination. So there are two illuminations. One is by the Sakshi, illuminations of the thought, part thought, or any thought, object thought. There are two illuminations. One is by the background Sakshi, and now intensified Chidabhasa illumination. So those two illuminations and vritti. So we have a part vritti, Chidabhasa, and the consciousness. And when I illumine, there is a knowledge is coming. Therefore, there is a phalam. Phalam means fruit of this pramana, fruit of seeing. My looking at the pot is knowledge that this is a pot, and I know this is a pot. That's called phalam. So vritti vyapti, when the vritti forms on it, so it's called vritti vyapti, and the result illumined, and the knowledge that this is a pot is called phala vyapti. That's for differentiation. So, but this is for every objective knowledge. What about Brahman? So is questioning about the nature of Brahman. Brahman is not a vritti vyapti is there for when I learned when I learned Vedanta, as we are doing here. So when I learned Vedanta, says it is being pointed out there is a Sakshi Chaitanyam. So how do I know Sakshi Chaitanyam? Learning Vedanta involves a vritti, but there is no phala vyapti, because Sakshi Chaitanyam is all the time there. There is no jnatatvam doesn't rise up as a phalam, doesn't rise, because it is all pervading consciousness. There is no phala vyapti. There is no fruit of the knowledge, because I am that, right, directly. It's pointing out that that's called self-effulgent, self-knowing, and all that words are being used, which is same as in the 10th sloka, na phalam brahma chaitanyam. So he calls it, there is no phala vyapti for brahma chaitanyam. There is a vritti vyapti, because I need to study, and that involves vichara, that involves inquiry, that involves thought process. But the thought process only reveals. That's why we said in the Sureswara gives a beautiful example in the forget the words, but in his text, where we have a pitch dark room and I need a torchlight, and I'm seeing object by focusing my torchlight on each object. I am revealing the object, and then I see a pot there, and I see pot is inverted. So out of curiosity, I lift the pot. So how do I know the pot is inverted? I put a torchlight and I see. So I need a torchlight to see the inverted pot. When I remove the pot, then I see a candle burning there. Then I don't need a torchlight to see that candle that is burning, because candle is self-luminous. So therefore, I don't need another again light to light the light. So in the same way, that the consciousness gets self-revealed when the thought rises. There is called the Brahma Chaitanyam, and there is no phala vyapti for that. Na phalam Brahma Chaitanyam manat praga nasatatva, because it is before any pramana, it is there all the time. Manat means before any pramana. Mana is pramana. Pragaha, before any pramana, before any means of knowledge arises, it is there all the time. Whereas for a pot, for a chair, there is no beforehand. I don't have any thoughts. Then I don't need to see pots. So only when I see a pot, then the thought of the pot is raising. So in this Loka 11 that we are chanting now, Paragarthaha Prameyeshu, Paragarthaha, Parak Arthaha. Arthaha is the object, Parak outside objects, so external objects. Prameyeshu, they are being prameyam, means being known. They are known as objects, being known. Ya samvitu, that knowledge, palatvena, by the knower of the object, sammata, is accepted. So every object that are outside are known because of the reflection of consciousness, and consciousness has to be there. So there is the mind and the formation of Chidabhasa, and that is what everybody understands too. Saeva iha Vedanta uktihi, that alone is Vedanta Mahavakya, a pramanataha, as a pramana, say meyam arthaha, has to be ayam arthaha, that has to be understood as the jnanam. Therefore there is a Vedanta pramana. So whenever there is a pramana is means of knowledge, it's a process involved, and therefore there is a phala vyapti and vritti vyapti in general. But here it's talking about the Brahman, which is all the time there. So there is not a time where the Brahman is not there. Therefore, whereas in the case of objects, the object thought was not there. So in that case, this is the pot, this is a chair. The chair thought was not there before. It is arising along with the vritti, and therefore there is a phalam. Whereas the phala vyapti is not there because it is already there, self-revealing, and therefore there is no pramey. It's called aprameyam. My nature is aprameyam. It's not a prameyam. Whereas the Vedanta Vichara Brahman Asti, that requires a pramana, and that's what in the 7th chapter that we discuss, there is this indirect knowledge, and there is the aparoksha jnanam. Both are mentioned, where the indirect knowledge involves the vichara, where Brahma asti, and its the nature of Brahman is Satchidanandam. He himself became many. All that information can only be gained by studying Vedanta. So there is a Brahma Satyam, Jagan Mithya. These aspects have to come from the Vedanta Vichara. Aham Brahmasmi, that nature also has to come through Mahavakya Vichara with inquiry. Tad Vijñāsasva, Tad Brahmeti. So even from the Brahman point, it is being pointed out, because Yatova imani bhutani jayante, yena jatani jivanti, yat prayam tabisham vishanti, Tad Vijñāsasva, Tad Brahmeti. That is Brahman from which the whole universe came, by which it is sustained, into which it goes back. That was discussed there. That is called the Paroksha Jnanam. Whereas at the same Mahavakya Vichara says there, it is how do I know? For that, you go to Mandukya Upanishad, and it says that it is a turiyam na antapragyam na vahipragyam na ubhayata pragyam na pragyana ghanam na pragyam na pragyam, then adrushtam achalam, and so on and so forth. It ultimately says that which is prapanchosham shantam shivam advaitam chaturtham manyante savigneyaha. Savigneya means you have to know. So you have to know by inquiry. That says vigneya means you have to inquire. But in that case, it's about my own self, because I'm talking about the self that is from which a waker, dreamer, deep sleep state, that I am has to be savigneya, to be known. How? Means through vichara, that mahavakya vichara, that in that case Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya is through the Paroksha Jnanam, and Aham, the Aham Brahma Eva, I am Brahman. So that has to be understood through vichara, and it is aparoksha jnanam, pointing out that you are the 10th man. That was illustrated in the last chapter. I don't want to go into that again, but it's here the difference between the knowledge of the Sakshi Chaitanyam versus knowledge of the Chidabhasa are being pointed out. So I have to use this to differentiate what is Sakshi Chaitanyam and what is a Chidabhasa. So now he's going to go to the statements of the Sureshwara from the Vartikakara, and in the Upadesha Sahasri, as well as in the Brahma Sutra Bhashya. Yes, in the commentary it says there is not much differentiation between the Sakshi Chaitanyam and the Chidabhasa, and how do we distinguish between the two, and that's what is going to now quote the Sureshwara Acharya's work, and he introduces in the 12th mantra, 12th verse. It says, Iti marikakarena chit sadrusyam vivakshitam brahma chit palayor vedaha sahasryam vishruto yataha together. Iti varikakarena chit sadrusyam vivakshitam brahma chit palayor vedaha sahasryam vishruto yataha. Iti vartikakarena. Vartikakara is the Sureshwara Acharya is called Vartikakara. So means he has written Vartika is the interpretation of the Brihadaranyaka Bhashya of Shankara. He has written a commentary on the commentary of Shankara, and it's in the verse form, and that's called Vartika. So Vartikakara is called Sureshwara. That means he has written thousands of mantras, and also he has written on the Upadesha Sahasri. So it is Vartikakarena Chit Sadrusyam, and it says Sadrusyam, the similarity between Chidabhasa is like a Kutastha Chaitanyam. Sadrusyam means similarity of Chit Sadrusyam with Chidabhasa. So Vivikshitam, and this is the explained clearly, Vivikshitam, and this has to be discriminated between there is a similarity between the sunlight and the moonlight. Sunlight and the moonlight are together all the time, because I am seeing the moonlight, but there is a sunlight only I am seeing in the form of a moonlight. So I had to use a discriminative intellect in order to differentiate the two. So Brahmachit Palayor Vedaha. So this Brahmachit Palayoho. So between the Brahman and Chidabhasa, so Vishruti has to be established clearly between the Sakshi Chaitanyam and the spotlight. So you have to distinguish between, how do we distinguish between the two? See, whenever I have a knowledge of the pot, so I have a pot knowledge, and also I am a knower of the pot. So there is a knower, known. So knower is a conscious entity, known is an inert entity. So I have to use there in the knower aspect of it, coming from the Sakshi Chaitanyam, and the known aspect is known by the Chidabhasa. In this every knowledge, these two dualities are occurring. Knower, known. I know this, I know this, I know this. So every knowledge has to have both of these. That means when I look at the chair, this is a chair and I know this is a chair. Spontaneously arises. So look, then chair knowledge is coming from the spotlight on it, and behind that Jnatatvam, the knowerness and ownness of the thought arises spontaneously as I am a knower, I am a knower, I know this. How do you know? I know. I don't have to prove it anyway because I can tell what it is. So how do you prove that you know? You are only making statement. So this is essentially, it spontaneously, without knowing I can't make a statement, without knowing I can't repeat what it is. You say this is a chair and say I know it is a chair. So therefore it's a spontaneous knowledge arises. I have to distinguish between every knowledge. Two aspects are coming in. One is the known and another is the knower. And I am the knower, not knower is somebody else. I am the knower. And I had to shift my attention to the knower I am and discard that neti, not this, not this. This is any object knowledge. So I had to concentrate, shift my attention from the Chidabhasa to Sakshi Chaitanyam for me to recognize who I am. So that's why in Upanishads, Pratibodha Viditam Matam, it is revealed in every thought. And this we go back because the essence is being discussed and he's quoting the Vartikakara, Sureshwara to emphasize the point. This will stop here and come back again. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.